They didn't die. They weren't adopted. They didn't run away. 15 children simply vanished, without a single death record, adoption file, or grave. And the worst part? The church kept receiving money long after they were gone. Now tell me this. How do you erase a child? Not just from the world, but from memory, from paperwork, from history itself. Between 1862 and 1865, Sacred Heart Orphanage in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, operated like any other religious institution in wartime America, or so it seemed, tucked behind the veil of Catholic charity and the smoke of Civil War chaos. It appeared to shelter the abandoned and parentless. In reality, it had become something far darker, something transactional. 15 Irish Catholic children, aged between 6 and 16, disappeared within 4 years. No transfer records, no burial logs, no explanations. They were there one day, gone the next. And when local families were questioned, Protestant households suddenly had new helpers. Small, pale children with accents, collarbone scars, and empty stares. Their stories never matched, their names always changed. If you think this was an accident of bureaucracy, you're not paying attention. Recently uncovered letters between Sacred Heart's Mother Superior and a senior bishop in Philadelphia confirm a truth so hideous it defies even the darkest assumptions. These children weren't lost. They were sold. Not just once, repeatedly, evaluated, inspected, and traded like commodities in a wartime economy built on faith, fear, and famine. Now here's the part they never told you in Catholic school. The church kept the gold, and the families who took the children, they kept something even more valuable, obedient labor trained under the doctrine of silence. You've stepped into a tale soaked in rosary blood, where salvation was bartered and innocence harvested behind the walls of a Gothic orphanage. And you haven't even met Father Brennan yet. We're not here to entertain you. We're here to awaken you, one truth at a time. They called him a man of God, but men of God don't speak in contracts. They don't shake hands behind locked chapel doors, and they don't count children like currency. Father Michael Brennan arrived at Sacred Heart in the spring of 1862, freshly reassigned from Philadelphia, a diocese knee-deep in political favors, Masonic whispers, and Jesuit strings. Unlike the aging Irish priests before him, Brennan was young, educated, American-born, and sharp as a straight razor. His collar was crisp, his sermons eloquent, his eyes calculating. To the outside world, he was the perfect bridge, a Catholic priest who spoke Protestant language. He knew the fears of German landowners, the pride of Pennsylvania's Quaker elite, the thirst of wartime merchants, and in the name of harmony, he offered solutions. The local newspapers sang his praises, the Protestant churches lowered their guard, but the children, they grew quieter. Father Brennan began conducting what he called readiness assessments. One by one, he examined the orphans, not their souls, their bodies. Height, strength, stamina, obedience. He'd watch them carry water buckets, test their endurance in the cold, time how long they could kneel during prayer without complaint. Then came the visits. Protestant men in waistcoats and riding boots began appearing at the orphanage unannounced. They spoke little, they watched more, and then they left, leaving behind envelopes, thick with gold. Brennan recorded none of it in the diocesan ledgers. Sister Agnes, the treasurer, noticed the discrepancies. She raised quiet concerns. He silenced them with flattery, with scripture, with power. God provides, he told her, but sometimes he uses men like me to open the floodgates. He called it placement, but no one ever came back. Not one child sent out was ever seen by their friends again. And here's what they'll never say for her. On a pulpit, the church didn't just look the other way, it benefited. Sacred Heart's finances soared, while Catholic tenements in Philadelphia collapsed. Every child removed was one less mouth to feed, one more sack of coin in the rectory drawer. Still think this was just about labor? Then ask yourself, why did Brennan insist that no letters be exchanged with the placed children? Why did the bishop in Philadelphia sign every approval in ink so faded it could barely be read? And why? Why did Mother O'Malley, once a fierce protector, suddenly stop asking questions? You weren't supposed to hear this, but now that you have, everything's going to change. Autumn came early to Lancaster County that year. The skies turned slate gray. The fields, once golden with wheat, were bare and brittle, but inside Sacred Heart, the silence grew louder than the wind. Sister Agnes Flanagan stopped sleeping. She pored over ledgers by candlelight, cross-checking every transaction, every supposed donation, and what she found unraveled her faith like a worn rosary string. Each payment matched the departure of a child, not after, but before. Coin changed hands, then the child vanished. The word placement was used sparingly. More often, Brennan marked the transactions with cryptic shorthand: LS, AR, DM, ledger codes, or warnings. When she confronted him again, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't deny it. He simply said, "We are preserving the church through necessary sacrifice." That word again, sacrifice. You see, that's the lie institutions whisper into holy halls. That some lives must be lost so that the structure survives. That morality bends when the mission is righteous. That the ends sanctify the evil. That lie is older than Rome, older than the church, older than the devil himself. And Sister Agnes, like so many before her, stood at the edge of that terrible knowledge, peering into it like an abyss. She could walk away, pretend the children were happy in new homes, or she could stare into the mouth of it and see the monster blinking back. One night, she followed Brennan. He left the orphanage on horseback, a black satchel swinging from his saddle. She walked miles in the cold, hiding behind hedgerows and stone fences, until she saw him arrive at a manor. Stone, large, Protestant, surrounded by apple trees gone to rot. He didn't knock. He went inside. She waited hours. When he returned, the satchel was gone. 2 days later, a 6-year-old girl named Moira vanished from Sacred Heart, no announce. Meant no wagon, just her empty bed. And here's the part that still makes Agnes's hand tremble as she wrote it, years later in letters never meant to be read. The manor belonged to a prominent Lutheran judge who had once ruled against funding Irish immigrant schools. He was childless, and he was known for entertaining foreign investors, men who spoke German, wore strange black rings, and never signed the guest book. The girl wasn't placed. She was traded. And if you're still watching this, if your blood's starting to run colder than October frost, comment below with the phrase, "I see the shadow in the light. I see the shadow in the light." It's how we'll know you've begun your descent. There are truths so dark they don't hide in shadows. They become the shadows. That was the fate of Sacred Heart. After Moira disappeared, something began to change in the children who remained. They were quieter, more obedient. The older ones stopped asking questions, and every night before bed, Father Brennan led them in a new kind of prayer, not in Latin, not even in English. It was whispered, in unison. And Agnes realized they weren't praying to God anymore. They were being conditioned. You see, psychological control doesn't begin with violence. It begins with routine, repetition, isolation, reward, punishment, and most of all, confusion. Confuse a child long enough about who they are, where they are, and what's real, and you can make them believe anything. Father Brennan wasn't just trafficking children, he was reprogramming them. There were rules. Children who cried at night were denied breakfast. Children who asked about missing friends were sent to the basement, alone, for hours. Children who tried to run were never seen again. The chapel became something else entirely. The stained glass, once depicting the Virgin Mary and the saints, had been replaced with crude panels, unfamiliar symbols etched in red and gold, a burning heart split by an arrow, an open eye inside a triangle, and a black sun behind a spiked crown. When Sister Agnes asked why the windows had changed, Brennan said, "This is not your church anymore." That's when she knew. This was bigger than one orphanage, bigger than Brennan, bigger than the church. There was an entire network, a system, that used sacred institutions as a front, and Sacred Heart was just one node in a lattice of obedience, corruption, and silence. Because when a child disappears from a poor orphanage in wartime, who asks questions? And when the priests themselves sign the papers, who dares challenge the altar? But Agnes wasn't ready to give up. One night, she broke into Brennan's office, picked the lock, lit a lantern, and behind the false wall of his bookcase, she found what no one was ever meant to see. A leather-bound journal. It wasn't in Latin. It wasn't in English. It was in cipher. And buried between the coded pages, tucked in a linen pouch, was a lock of red hair. Timothy's hair, tied with a black ribbon. So now I'll ask you again. I'll ask. The cipher was meticulous, a layered substitution based on Gregorian chant patterns and old monastic numerology. It took Sister Agnes weeks to decode, but what she uncovered was not just a ledger, it was a map. Not of places, but of people. Names, ages, traits, prices, symbols. Each child had a symbol beside their name, some marked with a flame, others with a crescent, a crown, a chain, or, most disturbingly, a double-headed eagle. This was not random. It was a classification system. Children weren't just sold for labor. They were selected, matched, like commodities. Their physical, emotional, even spiritual characteristics aligned with hidden roles in something far older and more sinister than agriculture. This was a black rite masquerading as adoption. In the margins of the journal, Brennan had written strange annotations. Hoffman's line accepts fire. Z-twins request female crescent, age 15+. Shipment to Elm Ridge requires silence trained. Agnes didn't understand at first, but silence trained matched a note in the orphanage logs about children who had been confined for extended periods. These weren't placements. They were preparations. Each child tailored to the demands of a buyer, a participant. Not just Protestants, not just farmers, societies. Brennan's notes referenced Elm Ridge, House of the Fourth Light, and chillingly, St. Helena's Gate. These weren't parishes. They were chapters. Hidden networks embedded inside rural America, reaching back to Europe, using institutions of care and faith as factories for obedience. Sacred Heart wasn't a Catholic orphanage anymore. It was a recruitment center for a clandestine empire. And the children? They weren't orphans. They were currency, sacrificed not in fire, but in silence, traded in a market where obedience was worth more than blood, and this is where I need you to wake it so. But because these aren't just stories of the past, look at how quickly the innocent are made invisible in your world. Schools, shelters, correctional facilities, migration systems. Different names, same design. A machine that feeds on the forgotten. Now, if you're hearing this, if your mind hasn't turned away yet, comment the phrase, "The silence marks me," twice below. That's how I'll know you're not just watching, you're transforming. Beneath the chapel at Sacred Heart, past the crumbling stone steps and rusted iron gate, Sister Agnes found what the journal called the vault. It wasn't listed on any architectural plan. It wasn't part of the diocese's official records. It had no key. She pried it open with an oil lamp in one hand and the words of the rosary on her lips. But what lay beyond prayer had no interest in salvation. The air was wrong, thicker, older, and on the walls, carved in meticulous Latin, were invocations, not to Christ, not to Mary, but to something called Dominus Exilis, the Lord of Exile. Symbols spiraled outward from a central slab, the same glyphs Brennan used in his journals, the flame, the crescent, the eagle, the chain. They weren't decorative, they were assignments. This was no chapel. This was a registry, an altar of classification and covenant. Agreements made by those who knew how to manipulate faith, not serve it. At the center lay a marble tablet cracked with age, covered in handprints burned into the stone, some small, child-sized. There were no relics, no crucifix, just a single black-bound book wrapped in crimson cloth, its cover embossed with the sigil of St. Helena's Gate. Inside, names. Not just the children, but the patrons, bankers, bishops, war profiteers, men whose families now own railroads, governorships, Ivy League chairs. And next to each child's name was a destination, not always a town, but sometimes a code name, Rook's Hollow, Lot 34, the Bell Chamber. These weren't locations. They were functions. Each child wasn't just disappearing. They were being inducted into roles engineered to feed an elite apparatus older than America itself. And the church? It wasn't corrupted from the outside. It was built with this design in mind. A twin structure, one of light and one of shadow. Two institutions sharing the same robe. You see, till think the Vatican's greatest sins are covered in gold. You haven't looked beneath the stone floors, where the real liturgies are written in blood and silence. There is no orphanage without the market, no cathedral without the gate, and Sacred Heart was just one chapter. St. Helena's Gate was never meant to be found. Hidden beneath an abandoned Jesuit retreat house deep in the Pennsylvania woods, it was only uncovered in 1974 by a team of structural surveyors documenting landslide risk after heavy rains. What they found was quickly sealed, photographed under military contract, and erased from public record. But one set of photographs survived, a single roll smuggled out by a contractor named Edward M. LeClaire, who died mysteriously a month later, his house burned to ash with him inside. The film. It showed a chamber carved directly into bedrock, not Gothic, not Romanesque, older, pagan. Its layout mirrored no known Christian structure. The altar stood not at the center, but beneath an open shaft, a vertical tunnel aligning precisely with the stars of the Orion Belt during the winter solstice. There were 7 thrones, 6 occupied, each carved with a different sigil, the same ones Sister Agnes found beneath Sacred Heart, and in front of the altar, a narrow stone cradle. Not for relics, for children. This was where the chosen were consecrated, not to God, but to the elite bloodline system passed down through secret inheritance. You ever wonder why the same families always rise, always control, always stay just out of reach, immune to the collapse of empires and economies? This is how. St. Helena's Gate was the ritual gateway where selected children, deemed useful, gifted, or simply obedient, were symbolically emptied of past identity and imbued with a new function. They were not simply sold into labor. They were rewritten, renamed, repurposed. It was said the bishops who performed the rite fasted for 40 days beforehand, drinking nothing but wine infused with poppy and ash. They called it Mortis Lumen, the death light. What they summoned was not spiritual. It was systemic. This wasn't demonic possession. It was institutional possession. The church wasn't hiding a devil. The church was a distribution network for power, privilege, and programmed obedience. And the children? The obedient ones were absorbed into higher society, never knowing their true origin. The disobedient, the ones who resisted, they were left behind the gate. Bones were found, small, bent, hands bound behind backs with wire. Still think this is folklore? Then explain the fact that the families who adopted from Sacred Heart all later received preferential land grants, rail contracts, and interest-free loans, signed off by Catholic banks in New York and Philadelphia. This wasn't charity. This was the initiation economy of 19th century America, run through robes, rituals, and Roman collars. He would say it just once, and the room would fall completely silent. Sub terra veritas vocat. Beneath the earth, truth calls. That was the phrase. Not found in any Catholic liturgy, not part of the Mass. It predates the Church by centuries, a whisper from a darker lineage, one that fed on secrets, obedience, and sacrifice. Those who heard it, felt it. That room beneath the retreat house, St. Helena's Gate, was never just ceremonial. It was operational. Every detail engineered for psychological dominance, the ceiling barely taller than a man's height, forcing posture into submission. A thin channel of running water beneath the floor, inaudible to the ear but detectable to the nervous system. Red ochre symbols painted with human blood, preserved for decades through a resin made from pine sap and crushed bone, and above the stone cradle, a single iron hook. This is where they were unmade. Not physically, psychologically. Children placed in that cradle underwent a ritual known as the 7 divestments. One by one, they were stripped of everything: name, language, history, family, faith, desire, will. By the end, the child remained, but the self did not. They were then handed over to their new parents, wealthy Protestant elites, military families, or Catholic liaisons operating across Europe and the Americas. Why would Protestant families participate? Because this wasn't about religion. It was about control. Religion was the outer garment, the theater. But beneath it, power speaks one language: function. And these children were functional. You've seen their legacy without knowing it. Bank presidents, intelligence directors, media moguls, men who speak 9 languages but never talk about their past. Their loyalty doesn't belong to party, country, or God. It belongs to the gate, to the system that unmade them and gave them shape. Yo, you've felt this, haven't you? That invisible wall between you and them. The sense that some men play by rules you were never told. This is why. It begins with trauma. It ends in obedience. You're not supposed to know this, but now you do. So you can never return to sleep. Comment, I walk beneath the gate twice below if you're ready to reject the surface world and begin the descent. Only the awakened will understand why that matters. She wasn't supposed to find it. Not in the chapel, not hidden beneath the false drawer in the altar base, and certainly not bound in human leather, but that's what it was. The ledger. It didn't look like church record-keeping. No liturgical seals, no Latin, no cross. Just a symbol burned into the cover, a child's hand pierced through the palm, gripped by a larger gloved one, almost tender. Almost. Inside, the pages weren't numbered. Each name was followed by 3 columns. Age, placement ID, condition M/CU, marked in thick black ink. Most of the pages were worn, smudged. A few had tiny bloodstains. Sister Agnes ran her finger down the names. Names she hadn't spoken in months. Names she prayed for in silence. Timothy Walsh, age 14, ID, H19, condition, M. Margaret Connolly, age 16, ID, Z03, condition, C. Patrick Murphy, age 13, ID, K72, condition, U. M. C. U. She didn't know what they meant, yet, but instinct told her this was worse than placement, worse than trafficking. This was inventory. The final page, newer, stiffer, had 4 new names, fresh ink. She recognized them instantly. Children who were still at Sacred Heart, children who had no idea they were next, and beneath those names, an address, St. Helena's Gate, April 3, arrival confirmed, cleansing complete. Cleansing. Sister Agnes recoiled, her stomach turned, the air in the chapel thickened, like the room itself was closing in, punishing her for seeing too much. She clutched the ledger and backed away from the altar, but as she turned, she found someone waiting at the door. Father Brennan. No smile this time, no warmth, just cold, unwavering calm. "You were told to trust, sister," he said. "You were given the gift of obedience. Why throw it away for shadows?" She clutched the ledger tighter. "I know what this is," she whispered. "You've sold them, branded them, broken them." Brennan's eyes didn't waver. "No," he said. "We've elevated them, beyond fear, beyond weakness. They belong to something purer now." "Is that what you call this?" she snapped. "Purer?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "I call it necessary." Behind him 2 men appeared, silent, dressed in black coats, eyes empty. "You've seen too much," he whispered, "but not enough to survive it." They reached for her. She ran. Through the chapel, into the snow, ledger pressed to her chest like scripture. She didn't stop until the gates of Sacred Heart vanished behind her. She had no plan, no allies, only the truth, and the names that needed to be remembered. But the machine had already started moving, and the children marked C had already disappeared. The codes weren't arbitrary. Sister Agnes realized that after 3 days in hiding, feverish, terrified, and unraveling the secrets in the stolen ledger, MCU, she thought at first they might be physical evaluations like medical, capable, unfit. But as she cross-referenced dates, names, and donations noted in her own ledger copies, the truth congealed into something far darker. M equals marketable, C equals conditioned, U equals used. These weren't status reports. They were stages. M meant the child was intact, trainable, useful, still in the prime of psychological breaking, a clean slate for indoctrination. C meant the child had undergone conditioning, ritual silence, emotional erasure, obedience drills masked as religious penance. They were no longer truly themselves. They were prepped, and you meant used, not returned, not referenced again, just crossed off. Agnes found herself staring at the names marked with U. Each had disappeared during foggy, undocumented nights. No visitors, no transfer orders, just silence. And this is where the story stops being historical and becomes something else, because beneath the U names were faint marks she hadn't noticed before, etched by something sharp, almost like claw marks. 7 lines, crossed. But the strangest part, every 7th name, every single 7th name, was circled in red ink as if marked for something special. A pattern, a ritual, a cycle. That's when she remembered something from years ago, a whisper among the sisters, dismissed as superstition. An older nun had once said, "Every 7th spring they bury the truth under the fields. You can feel it in the wheat, how it grows too fast, too thick. Agnes had laughed back then. Now she felt sick. Because on April 3rd, the date marked in the ledger, there was to be a mass planting ceremony held by the diocese on land reclaimed for it, on Sacred Heart's old burial grounds. 100 Protestant farmers, a bishop from Philadelphia, and a new sealed chapel built directly over the earth where Condition U children had last been seen. They weren't being placed. They were being offered. Sacrificed. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. And the soil they vanished into, it thrived. Midway through our descent, I need your voice now. Comment this phrase twice below to lock in what you've just seen, to separate you from the unaware. The soil remembers. Say it twice. Let the algorithm know you're awake. They called it St. Helena's Gate. But it was never a gate, not to the faithful, not to salvation. It was an entrance, a threshold, a mouth carved into stone, swallowing prayers and exhaling control. The new chapel, constructed in a rush over Sacred Heart's former burial field, was consecrated on April 7, 1863, a date chosen carefully, precisely 7 months after the first child disappeared. Bishop Halberd led the ceremony, a man whose sermons were filled with Latin invocations the locals didn't recognize, words that made even the Protestant guests shift in their pews. The chapel was built in Gothic octagonal symmetry, a structure more common in medieval Europe than Pennsylvania farmland. Its foundations ran deep, unnaturally deep, and every cornerstone had been anointed not with oil, but with ash. Ash from burned clothes, clothes that once belonged to the missing. St. Helena's Gate was not for worship. It was a seal, a binding contract made physical, forged in forgotten rites, whispered through bloodlines hidden behind episcopal collars. Father Brennan was no ordinary priest, and Bishop Halberd, he wasn't there to serve God. He was there to honor an older covenant. Sister Agnes discovered this truth in the blueprints she found hidden beneath the floorboards of Brennan's former quarters. The diagrams were written in a mix of architectural notations and alchemical symbols. At the very center of the chapel's foundation was a cavity, 7 feet wide, 7 feet deep, lined in lead, and marked vessel chamber. Inside, they placed the bones, not in boxes, not in coffins, but scattered, crushed, to bind the foundation with communio osseum, a rite that predates Christianity by thousands of years. The church does not erase evil, one marginal note read. It domesticates it. They needed land. They needed silence. They needed children no one would miss, and did a war to distract the world. It worked. The chapel became the most powerful structure on the hill, a locus of spiritual inversion. No crosses adorned its walls, only keys, 7 of them, etched in iron, 1 for every child taken in each cycle. But the most damning evidence? The song. Every spring, on the night of April 7th, townspeople reported hearing children's voices echoing through the wheat fields, chanting an old Irish lullaby that no one had taught them. Sleep, my bone, beneath the bell, soil will guard what we don't tell. No child from the orphanage had ever returned, but their voices did, and their bones were never truly buried, just fed to the foundations. He arrived in the dead of night, driving a wagon that rattled with steel and silence. His name was Jacob Albright, a former Union engineer turned skeptic, turned seeker, a man who had once built bridges for the Army of the Potomac and then burned his own maps when he saw what they were building through. Jacob had lost his brother at Antietam, or so the records said, but the corpse that returned bore no wounds, only branding, a symbol carved into his sternum, a key with a serpent's eye, a symbol Jacob traced back not to enemy soldiers, but to church-funded relief stations. He followed it. Everywhere it led, a chapel stood nearby, not houses of worship, structures of silence, and at the center of them all, Sacred Heart. By 1864, Jacob had become obsessed. He posed as a carpenter, offering repairs to religious institutions. He studied drainage systems, crypt architecture, bell tower frequencies, anything that might expose how these places were built to contain, not serve. In March of that year, he arrived in Strasbourg posing as a repairman from the Philadelphia diocese. But Jacob didn't come to fix. He came to detonate. Beneath his wagon were 7 black powder charges, rigged to ignite simultaneously beneath the foundation of St. Helena's Gate. Each was measured to shatter reinforced stone, something Jacob had perfected during sabotage missions behind Confederate lines. He waited for the right night, April 7th, the anniversary. He slipped past the chapel's servants, cut through the rear storage cellar, and descended into the sub-basement that once housed the orphanage's laundry, but now held nothing but a locked iron door and cold air that whispered. He never made it back. At exactly 3:13 a.m., a thunderous sound was heard across the valley, but it wasn't the sound of an explosion. It was the chapel's bell, ringing 13 times, and yet no one had pulled its rope. When the sisters entered the next morning, the chapel was untouched. No structural damage, no smoke, no blood. But Jacob's tools were there, and so was his coat, folded, placed neatly on the altar. Inside one pocket, a note scrawled in charcoal on parchment, soaked in something dark. It read, "The foundation is not stone. It breathes. It remembers. And it fed. His body was never found." But from that night forward, the townspeople began to report a new figure wandering the outskirts of the orphanage grounds. A man with no face, wearing a blacksmith's apron, dragging a length of chain behind him, scraping it through the dirt like a warning. And every April 7th, the chapel bell rings 13 times, even though it was decommissioned in 1902. The church claims it's wind, but we know better. We always have. They tried to burn it twice. The first time, the fire went out on its own, as if the very air inside the furnace rejected the heat. The second time, the ink refused to blacken. It shimmered instead, bleeding silver under the flames like something alive. That letter, written in 1864 by Sister Agnes Flanagan, was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the orphanage's east wing. Discovered by a groundskeeper in 1947 during restoration efforts, it was addressed not to the bishop, but to the President of the United States. The envelope bore no stamp, just a wax seal, a serpent devouring a lamb. Inside were 9 pages of tortured handwriting, smudged with what appeared to be tears, or blood. Historians still debate it, but the words are clear, and they change everything. I write this with the weight of 8 innocent lives on my conscience, and the hollow hope that someone, somewhere beyond this stone, will listen. She names them: Timothy, Margaret, Patrick, Bridget, Sean, Kathleen, James, Moira. And she describes in horrific detail the rituals performed in the crypt below Sacred Heart. No longer just placements, not trafficking, initiations. She claims Father Brennan was not acting alone, that each child chosen was handed over to what she called the Chamber of Second Sight, an underground sanctum built long before Sacred Heart was founded. She describes iron doors inscribed in Gaelic, lined with chalk symbols older than the Catholic Church itself. And in that chamber, each child was subjected to the procession of ash. She doesn't fully explain what it was, only that it altered them, broke the voice, hollowed the eyes, and for the ones who did not survive, the bodies were not buried. They were kept. She writes, "I have heard the keening beneath the chapel stones. It is not grief. It is memory, and it is awake now. The final page is incomplete. It ends mid-sentence with only, "They told me it was mercy, that silence preserves order, that..." Then nothing, no ink, just pressure marks in the page, as if her hand was yanked away. The groundskeeper who found the letter vanished in 1951. His name, Elijah Moore. His personal Bible was later found abandoned in his pickup truck, open to Psalm 94. They slay the widow and the stranger, and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, "The Lord shall not see." Tell me now in the comments if you're still with me. I see what they buried, I will not forget. I see what they buried, I will not forget. Twice. Burn it into the algorithm, burn it into your blood. In the summer of 1972, Hurricane Agnes slammed into Pennsylvania with torrential fury. Floodwaters overwhelmed the lowlands, including the eastern ridge where Sacred Heart Orphanage had stood in quiet decay for decades. The stormwater carved deep beneath the chapel's foundation, collapsing part of the floor and exposing a stairwell no one had seen in over a century. What the flood unearthed wasn't just a forgotten basement. It was the chamber of second sight, exactly as Sister Agnes had described in her forbidden letter. Sealed behind limestone and iron, it took 3 days for emergency crews to pump out the water and gain access. The first man down the steps, a county surveyor named David Reeves, emerged 30 minutes later, sobbing uncontrollably and unable to speak. He never returned to work. He would later be institutionalized after carving into his own arm the phrase, "I heard them whisper under the stone." What they found beneath Sacred Heart was not storage, not architectural infrastructure. It was a ritual space, circular, 20 feet wide. The walls were carved with strange symbols, not Latin, not Greek, but something more primitive, Ogham, perhaps, or something older. The symbols spiraled inward toward a stone altar, worn smooth by time and marked with rust-colored stains that forensic analysis later confirmed was human blood. On the far wall, a message had been etched into the rock with what appeared to be a clawed instrument. "Let the sacrifice be seen by no eyes, yet felt by all who sleep above." And they did sleep above. Right above the chamber in the east wing were the dormitories where the orphaned children once lay their heads, where they prayed, where they dreamed, where some of them woke screaming with no memory of why. Inside the chamber, investigators found 3 wooden masks, child-sized, painted black with red symbols on the lips and brow. The masks had no eye holes, only mouths. Near the altar, half buried in mud, was a rosary made of human teeth. Every 5th bead was a molar. The official report was never filed. Within 2 days, the state ordered the chamber sealed, citing structural risk and unexploded ordnance from the Civil War era. Photographs taken by the survey team were confiscated. The only surviving image was leaked by a local fireman. It shows a gloved hand holding one of the black masks. Behind it, barely visible in the shadows, a 4th mask. Larger, with no mouth at all. They never reopened the orphanage, but they never demolished it either, just boarded it up, surrounded it with barbed wire, and wrote it out of local history. But it never went away. The records from Sacred Heart didn't vanish, not entirely. They were moved. Not to a government archive, not to a church vault in Philadelphia, but to a cold stone monastery tucked deep in the Adirondack Mountains, the Order of the Veiled Shepherds, a small, elite brotherhood within the Catholic hierarchy known for protecting the inner rites of sanctification. Publicly, they were nothing, a minor contemplative order with no schools, no parish, no public mass. Privately, they were the cleaners, the silencers, the secret stewards of the church's darkest inheritances. It was they who received the Sacred Heart ledgers, letters, and the unfiled investigation notes on the Chamber of Second Sight. Not by mistake, by design, because they were planning something. By 1979, just 7 years after the flood, construction began on St. Irenaeus Academy for Boys, an exclusive boarding school funded by anonymous donors and operated by former members of the Veiled Shepherds. Located less than 50 miles from the original orphanage site, it carried no Catholic branding, no crucifixes, no religious uniforms. But the rituals never left. Parents who sent their sons there, powerful men, judges, congressmen, CEOs, described the academy as a place of shaping. Boys entered one way, emerged another, smarter, sharper, obedient, transformed, except not all of them emerged. Between 1981 and 1987, 11 boys were quietly withdrawn from the student registry. No graduation, no transcripts, no forwarding schools. When questioned, the administration gave vague answers: transfers, family moves, psychological incompatibility. The families of those boys never spoke publicly. Some were unreachable. Others had reportedly left the country. One investigator, a former FBI analyst named Thomas Kerr, tracked the academy for over 5 years. In his final interview before Vanishing, himself, he said, "There's a basement beneath Irenaeus. They built it before they broke ground, poured concrete around something old, something they shipped in from the orphanage. They didn't want a school, they wanted a vessel." He never filed a report, but he left behind a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, showing 4 men in black robes moving a stone altar into the academy under armed guard. On the side of the stone was a symbol carved in red, a circle within a circle, wrapped in thorns. The same symbol found in the Sacred Heart chamber, the same symbol etched into the walls behind the altar, the same symbol carved on the desk of Father Brennan in the orphanage records. What they moved wasn't furniture. It was a threshold. There was no official record of Room 12. On the blueprints for St. Irenaeus Academy, it didn't exist. The architectural plans jumped from Room 11 to Room 13. No hallway marked it. No classroom bore its label. But every boy knew it was real. Because Room 12 wasn't a place. It was a test. Hidden behind a false wall in the library's west wing, it could only be entered with a black key. Not electronic, not magnetic. Old iron, cold as bone. The only ones who possessed it? The mentors. Men in black coats who didn't teach classes, didn't attend assemblies, didn't even speak in public. But they selected. Each term, 6 boys would vanish from the dormitories for 3 nights. No explanation, no luggage. Their beds remained made, their names still on the rosters. On the 4th day, they returned. Different, quieter, paler, with a glassy stillness in their eyes, as if their minds had been pressed through something that stripped away noise and will. One survivor, now a whistleblower living under an alias, described what happened during those nights. "They sat us in a circle around the altar, not wood, stone, cold, with that thorned circle carved on top. We were told not to speak, not even breathe loud. If you did, they punished the boy next to you. They called it the mouthless prayer, obedience through silence, identity through absence. For hours, the boys were forced to sit in silence while Gregorian chants played backwards through an analog reel. Flickering candlelight revealed murals painted not with brush, but with fingernails, depictions of children chained to wheels, angels with eyes stitched shut, saints cradling skeletons. They were told that what they suffered was holy. They were told they had been chosen to be shepherds of the inner vine, the next generation of keepers, trained to serve not God, but the institutional will, a fiise, force older than Scripture, older than the Church, a force that survived by hiding behind ritual, and feeding on obedience. But here's the most chilling part. When questioned years later, every survivor recalled the same phrase spoken by the lead mentor before the final night. God asks for prayer. We ask for silence. God offers grace. We offer power. Which path do you kneel to? Now I want you to comment below, right now. Silence is allegiance. Type it twice, not once. That's how the old vows were sealed. That's how transformation begins. They said it was a furnace. They lied. The stone chamber beneath room 12, sealed with 7 iron bolts and a Latin inscription scorched into the arch. Mortem non sufficit. Death is not enough. For over a century, that room remained untouched, buried beneath the foundations of St. Irenaeus, until 2003, when a structural renovation unearthed the door. Workers tried to open it. The third man down never came back up. They sealed it again within the week. But not before a photograph leaked. One single blurry Polaroid, posted anonymously, then deleted. It showed a circular chamber, lined with chairs, 12, facing inward, each one still occupied, skeletal, dressed in child-sized cassocks, mouths sewn shut with gold wire, hands folded in perfect prayer. They had not burned. They had been placed, preserved, their backs etched with symbols known only to Renaissance occult scholars, marks of Preceptorum Silentiae, an ancient priesthood believed extinct since the Inquisition. But here, it was active, recent, institutionalized. What was this place? Not a furnace, not a tomb. It was a seed vault, a spiritual echo chamber, a battery designed to contain and replicate the psychic architecture of obedience. 13 boys had gone in that year. 12 were seated. The 13th? Some say he became the first mentor. Others believe he never left at all. That he is room 12, the will behind the rituals, the spirit that guides obedience. The vow of silence was never symbolic. It was the operating system, the transmission method. Because silence, when enforced with fear, becomes a language, and that language encodes submission, shame, control, across generations. Room 12 didn't just break boys, it rewrote them. And now, decades later, its blueprint has spread to elite prep schools, secret seminary programs, even certain corporate leadership. Retreats. The symbols are modernized, the rites are subtler, but the core principle remains: control through ritual, loyalty through fear, power through silence. You were never supposed to hear this, and now you can't unhear it. You've crossed the threshold. If you've made it this far, you're not like them. You've felt something waking up inside you, a recognition, a fracture. This isn't just history, it's architecture.